Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Welcome into the GSMC Football Podcast here on the GSMC Podcast Network. I am your host, Brice Lewis, and today we obviously have another jam-packed show of football that we're going to talk to y'all about today. We're going to just, get into a lot of different things. We're going to talk about some new CBA formatting. We're also going to talk about some news and notes, who's on the move, who could potentially get traded, who's on the market, who could be potentially presented to teams. We're also going to give some NFL draft talk about the quarterbacks, since that's the big topic of discussion, obviously, every year around NFL draft time, which is the quarterbacks, and so on and so forth. So we're going to talk about all that and more right here on the podcast. And, we're just going to keep it going from there. So, just to start off, though, we're going to talk about some CBA talk. Obviously, this is the last NFL season coming up before the CBA is up and they have to redo it. Obviously, both the NFLPA and the owners are meeting, having meetings trying to break progress. So this is an issue by the time next year is over. One of the things they have been proposed, obviously, is that the owners in the league wants an extra game in the regular season, and they're also thinking about extending the playoff format. If they extend the playoff format, they'll extend it to 7 teams. So that'll just add one more team into the playoffs. I think they look at the fact that you have all these teams battling for that last spot, like 3-4 teams. And it's like, well, if you give them that extra spot, then that extra team who's battling can get in. Where, with 6 teams, maybe there's a team potentially, like think about the NFC this year. The NFC was really tough. Every team had 10 plus wins, and the only team that didn't make it was the Rams, I believe, that were 9-7. I believe they were 9-7, and you just kind of feel like, but you felt like they were still a decent enough team to still make it to the playoffs. And obviously, you never know what's going to happen if a team gets into the playoffs, because anybody can make a run. So it's something that has been definitely advertised. It's been definitely something that people want. It's something that people have wanted for a while. The league have wanted this for a while. And obviously players are not obviously in turn of this, because obviously they understand that playing that extra game can be damaging to the body. And then, it's not really, I guess, in a way helping them out in any way. The only way, that's why sometimes they may try to make an agreement like, okay, we add an extra game. Obviously, in the NFL, you have a 52-man roster, but only 48, I believe, can be activated, or 47. So maybe they'll do it like every player can be activated. So now you have your full 52-man roster activated on game days, unless you have injuries. And that way, I guess more depth can be added, particularly for that extra game. And obviously, like I said, the playoff format is interesting because, like I said, I think it's more of it's an extra game, potentially. It makes you intrigued because that means that 6 teams are going to probably play. So probably anybody who is a 2 seed and below won't play or will play. And then the number 1 seed won't play for a week. And then you have 3 teams that then will meet. One will meet the number 1 seed, and then the other 3 teams will play. Will match up out of the 3 wild card games. So I guess it would limit the importance of a number 2 seed, because currently in the current playoff format, a number 2 seed can have a bye week. Well, obviously, if this happens, the number 2 seed can't get a bye week. They'll have to play wild card weekend. And it's because, in a way, the number 2 seed, if you think about it, is basically a week ahead wild card type of team, because literally you get one playoff game, just like a wild card team that win their division, and then you go on the road. Where obviously, if you're a number 2 seed, you win your playoff game. If the number 1 seed wins, you're going to go on the road anyway. So it may be they may feel like, we just might as well just let them all play at the same time. And then we have our divisional, then we have our NFC or AMC, and then we have our Super Bowl. It'll be interesting to see. There has been reports that there has been significant progress. So it sounds like they are maybe coming to some type of a common ground potentially. They're getting along and they're finding progress. I feel like there's going to be obviously meetings throughout the year that's going to happen, as there should be, to, get closer to those negotiations and to get closer to, being able to put out a good product. So that's definitely going to be the thing they're going to try to figure out. And, they're just going to do what they can out there. And obviously, we hopefully don't have what we had about the last time a CBA agreement happened, where they missed 2 preseason games and it didn't get literally done until August. Obviously, that isn't a great time, and it wasn't something that everybody wanted, clearly, because obviously people love football and people want to watch the game of football, and having football taken away from a lot of these fans, it's almost like, what are we going to do if we have no football during that fall year, into summer, into fall year? So it's one of those types of things. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. It's obviously something that is lingering now over the NFL, and it'll be interesting to see the more reports that come out about maybe different types of changes to the CBA. If they're going to add maybe some practice time, are they going to change or eliminate some things? Obviously, I look at the CBA, you're bargaining for both sides, because both sides would rather have something, and so you bargain to see, okay, where can we come in the middle where we're both satisfied with the middle? And then what happens is then you can see through the years of the CBA, okay, is this working? Is this not working? Where if you can see if it's working, it's kind of like, okay, well, the CBA worked really well for us. We can build off of this. Or if it doesn't work, well, next time we do a CBA, we know to change this. We know that we need to adjust this. And that's going to be important. That's going to be very important. Now, also, Adam Schefter from ESPN reported that initially on the playoff format also, the structure has been agreed on by both sides. So it looks like that's going to probably be in the deal. So, it looks like they're going to definitely have it, which I think is okay. I think from a team and player perspective, you're not going to be mad about having an extra spot in the playoffs. You may feel like, oh, we're going to get in if we are 7th best record in our conference. So I don't feel like players are going to look here and say, well, we have a chance to get in, we don't want to get in. But I also think owners are like, that's extra money. So I think that's one of the few things in the CBA also that both sides can agree to and come to on an agreement of, and that's why they're able to do it. And then other news, Stefan Diggs, obviously that was a big story. Stefan Diggs was deleting some pictures, deleting some stuff out of his bios on his social media. There's this report that he wants out of Minnesota. Obviously, if you remember in some of the games this year with Minnesota, Stefan Diggs has been very emotional on the sidelines. It's hard sometimes when you have two great receivers like Adam Thielen and Stefan Diggs on the team, because they both feel like, I can change the game. I'm that good. Give me the ball. And obviously with Kirk Cousins, sometimes your passing game can be limited, where you may not be getting the ball until a player gets frustrated. Especially because I feel like if the offense struggles and you're a star player, you feel like, and you're not getting the ball, you feel like it's because you're not getting me the ball. And I think some of his frustrations maybe with Kirk Cousins, maybe he realizes with Kirk Cousins, he feels like he can't maximize his potential with Kirk Cousins as his quarterback. So that's why he may be interested in getting a trade out of there. Now, it's been reported Minnesota is unlikely to trade him, or right now they're in that phase of we're not going to trade you. But you never know, if a team offers something up good enough, they may be willing to look into it. Obviously, if Stefan Diggs continues to be unhappy and makes it clear he's not going to return to the team, that's something that you want to do. Obviously, around draft time, this is a very crucial time, because you usually want to make a lot of these trades before the draft, when everybody kind of has assets from the draft instead of waiting after the draft, because now at that point, you don't know what the other team's going to be like next year, but you make trades just hoping maybe, this team's going to have a higher draft pick or have a mid-range draft pick or something like that. Obviously, Stefan Diggs can help a lot of teams. Obviously, every wide receiver that's out in the market, they're going to connect to the Patriots, because everybody knows the Patriots are looking for a wide receiver. Potentially, the Jets could get in that. I have some news on them later, maybe connecting them to Odell Beckham. They have, a lot of different teams that if you just need that number one guy, Stefan Diggs can be that guy for you. And so it's not like they wouldn't have a market for Stefan Diggs. So if they really, really thought about it, they probably could get something decent back for him. And I think that's something that they probably definitely would not be against. And, we'll have to see how it actually turns out when it gets down to it and everything like that. So we're going to have to definitely see what actually ends up happening. And, hopefully this situation is going to be resolved and Stefan Diggs can be a little bit happier in Minnesota potentially. But, you never know how these things are going to go. But coming up next, we're going to have some news and notes around the league, like the Redskins picking up Adrian Peterson's option. The Pats want Tom Brady's decision soon while also opening contract talks in a couple of weeks. And Greg Olsen signs with the Seattle Seahawks. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about the new CBA format for the playoffs and the regular season as currently being constructed right now by both sides. Both sides have already agreed on the playoff format. They're probably still going to work on the season format. So it'll be definitely interesting to see what happens. It seems like we're making more progress than we did last time these CBA talks came around. Because last time these CBA talks came around, it was getting to a point where even a year ahead, they were basically not in agreement. Where now they think maybe they can get a deal done, maybe even next month. So we'll have to see what happens. But also we talked about Stefan Diggs, who some people think some of the things he's been doing on social media means that he wants out. He wants out of Minnesota. Obviously, we've seen him in sometimes his displeasure on the sidelines in Minnesota, so potentially that could equal him leaving the Minnesota Vikings. Minnesota has no interest in getting rid of him, but we have to see what happens. You never know how these situations turn out. Hopefully it won't get any worse than usual, but we're going to have to see. So coming up first, we have Tom Brady, who currently is making or mulling over a decision if he's going to stay in New England or test free agents. Now, it's been reported that the Patriots would like him to make a decision soon, plus they're also opening talks up with Brady in a couple of weeks. So probably right before free agency starts. I think the Patriots think if Brady commits to them before free agency, obviously he's coming back, and then they also can now have a plan going into free agency, knowing, okay, we got Brady locked up. Where if it lingers in the free agency, it's kind of more complicated. Because now maybe certain guys they want to pick up, they're hesitant to maybe go after because they don't even know what's going to happen with Brady. It's going to really test the planning of the Patriots and Bill Belichick and everybody, because that's why I understand why maybe they're going to want a commitment from Brady before free agency. Don't be surprised if Brady's not willing to give him that commitment. And, he didn't have that commitment. That could make New England move off of him. That could make him say, if he's gonna test free agency, we're not gonna sign you back, and we're gonna move on. Now you would think that's crazy, but it's just the thing about it is Brady could use other teams' leverage. Okay, yeah, I could come back to New England, but what if I visit them and they offer me $30 million? You're offering me $30 million, but then this other team offers $33 million. Now, obviously, we've never known Brady to be about the money, but he could use that to maybe try to get more out of it. Obviously, looking at every situation. We'll have to see. It's going to be very interesting to just really see how this breaks down for New England. I think a lot of people are going to have their eyes on this situation because they don't know what New England is going to do. They don't know if New England really will let Brady walk. Does Brady really not want to come back? These are all questions that people are looking for answers to with this Tom Brady situation. So I think it's something, that we really have to find out. It's something that we really have to see about, and we'll just have to see if maybe something could happen here. Like I said, because New England has plans for their team with or without Tom Brady. And they have to follow those plans regardless of what happens, because if they don't, then they could end up getting themselves handicapped by the situation, losing people they need, and then even if they get Brady back, not being able to pick up the people they want. So now they're having to maybe make more of a desperate move, like a trade, to get somebody in there to accommodate with Brady, to impress Brady. Because I think Brady has to look at it like this. One of the things he wants is better offensive weapons. But if you sign before free agency, they could tell you they're going to get more offensive weapons, but you really don't know if they're going to be able to get the weapons they need. So it's like, but at the same time, I also feel like Brady is a guy who probably would want this to be a quick decision, but at the same time, a part of me is just like, I could see Brady letting this pull a Kawhi, let it linger, because, he's the one with all the power here. He doesn't have to make a decision right away. That's why with how New England has been in the past, they could potentially do what I said earlier, which is if he does not agree to a deal by a certain point, and let him walk, because they're just like, listen, we want you back, but we're not going to handicap our team for you. So it's definitely a tug of war here between the Patriots and Brady. So we're going to have to see what decisions or what is came up with here, and we're going to have to see what decisions are actually ended up being made. Because like I said, I'm sure both sides don't want this to linger any more than it has to. But at the same time, both sides don't want this to be where one of them is stuck in a bad situation with New England are not able to get the people they want, and Brady not being able to get what he needs if he comes back. In other news, Adrian Peterson's option is being picked up. He'll be paid $2.2 million for base salary. The 34-year-old has come back for another season. Adrian Peterson is likely like another ageless wonder. Adrian Peterson, even though he's not the same AP of old, he is still an effective running back. It was a weird start to last season as he wasn't playing at first, but then he eventually became the workhorse back. Obviously, with him and Darius Dice now as the two running backs in Washington, you could see Adrian Peterson being the second guy, but he could still be effective. He could still run hard. He could still give you first downs or goal line. So he's a great addition to the team. He's still playing at a good level. He could be Frank Gore, the ageless wonder Frank Gore, where he just continues to play at a consistent level, keeps his body in shape, and just continues to run hard. And listen, he'll never be that destructive breakaway back like he used to be, but he can still be an effective back who moves the chains, and there is absolutely nothing wrong with that if you're the Washington Redskins. So, obviously Adrian Peterson, when he hit the scene as a rookie, had one of the best rookie seasons for a running back in history. And he really just came out there and was just so dominant for years. Obviously, you remember the year he got 2,000 yards rushing. It was a time. It was a time. And, whenever Adrian Peterson does decide to call it quits, we have to remember him as one of the best running backs to ever play this game. And when we just hope we'll have to see how many more years does Tom Brady have. Not Tom Brady. Why am I saying Tom Brady? This happens sometimes. Adrian Peterson has in him to still play at the level he is playing at, and feeling like he is not hurting his team, but only helping his team. And in other news of this segment, Greg Olsen. Obviously, Greg Olsen, if you've seen him, he's done he's done Super Bowl coverage. He's done some broadcasting for the XFL. He's agreed to a 1-year deal with the Seattle Seahawks. Obviously, Greg Olsen has that job at Fox if he wants it. So it's always been there, but I'm sure he wanted to still play football, and Seattle had interest in bringing him in, which they went ahead and did, to a 1-year deal. Obviously, Russell Wilson has been able to make any weapon efficient and effective for him. Obviously, Jacob Hollister became an emerging target. Their tight end Will Dissly, I believe, who was hurt last year for the season, is coming back, and Greg Olsen. So they'll have a pretty good tight end core, and Russell Wilson is going to definitely use that to his advantage. Tight ends are known as a safety blanket within the NFL offense, because they're bigger than most guys who are guarding them. So usually you can always depend on them over the middle to make big plays for you. I think this was a great move for the Seattle Seahawks, and hopefully Greg Olsen, if he's been anything like he has been for Cam Newton these last few years, he'll be just as effective as ever and continue to come out there and produce at a high level. Obviously, he's had some injury issues the last few years, but obviously we hope that he doesn't continue to have those injuries moving into the future, but we'll have to see. But yeah, so Greg Olsen signs with the Seattle Seahawks for a year, so we'll have to see what happens with that. But coming up next, we're going to get into some NFL draft talk news. There's talk that 3 quarterbacks could go within the top 5 of the NFL draft. I'll explain how and why this is being said. And also, should Joe Burrow pull an Eli Manning on the Cincinnati Bengals and force a trade or force them not to draft him? Find out all that and more right here on the podcast.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to extreme cage fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some more news around the league, like Tom Brady on the Patriots opening up discussions in a couple of weeks. New England will like his decision very soon, so that could potentially mean that if Brady does not agree to a deal by a certain time limit, the Patriots may just go ahead and let him walk and tell him to find a new team, which would be very shocking to the NFL world. Also, Adrian Peterson's option has been picked up for another year, so we'll get another year of Adrian Peterson. And also, the Seattle Seahawks pick up very reliable Cam Newton's tight end, Greg Olsen, to join them to help bolster their passing attack in Seattle with the tight end position. Now we're going to get into some NFL draft talk here, really surrounded around the quarterbacks, because obviously, with most NFL drafts, stories are surrounded around QBs. And to initially start off, we're going to talk about this. So, if you think about it, there has been rumors around the league that obviously Bengals are going to select Joe Burrow. Next is Tua. Now, recently there has been reports that the Detroit Lions could potentially trade or release Matthew Stafford. Now, we don't know how real this is, but it's been out there. It's been reported. So now people are thinking that they would do that, then trade up into the top 5 to pick up Tua. And then there was also another report that came out saying that the Miami Dolphins actually may have more interest in Justin Herbert than Tua himself. So that's right now is the rumor for the top 5, 3 quarterbacks getting drafted in the top 5 if it happens in that scenario. Obviously, the only way that would obviously happen first would be clearly if the Matthew Stafford thing happens. I don't think the Detroit Lions would trade up if they didn't get rid of Matthew Stafford. They could and still get Tua to be behind him for a year, but still, would you really want to do that The team's like, well, this guy's going to be here next year. Stafford's probably going to be gone. You don't know how it's going to mess with the dynamic. Obviously, Miami, people wonder if that's a smokescreen just to maybe think, oh, there's no need to trade up. We're not going to draft him anyway. Because, obviously people feel like there's smoke screens that get sent out across the league. So maybe people think Miami's getting that report out there to make teams feel like, oh, he'll drop below Miami. We don't have to trade up. Just to scare teams from getting to trade up before they don't jump in front of them. Where it's just like, oh, they're going to draft Justin Herbert. Well, we can stay at 6 or 7 or 8 and pick up 2 of them. So, obviously, this is going to be a very interesting situation. I think, obviously, people are trying to connect quarterbacks to these teams. Obviously, a lot of people, again, have connected Burrow to the Bengals, and then a lot of people have connected Tua to the Dolphins. Herbert has been the wild card. He's been connected to the Chargers more than anybody, but potentially everybody else could potentially get in the race for him. I mean, because a lot of quarterbacks are needed this year. But this quarterback draft is also considered one of the weaker drafts. So, we'll have to really see what potentially happens in that regard. The strength of this draft class this year is in the wide receiving group, as that's where a lot of people feel like a lot of the talent is. A lot of the NFL guys, a lot of guys who can come in right away, be effective. And obviously the receivers are one of the weaker parts of this draft. So we'll have to see what happens necessarily in that position. I personally think Detroit wouldn't make that move, because if you're Matt Patricia, if you have another losing year, you'll probably be fired. Do you really want to trade away assets and potentially Matthew Stafford for a rookie quarterback if you know you need to win this year? That's a question you have to ask yourself. Because making a trade like that with the team that y'all have and the record that y'all have had is risky. It's very, very risky. So you really have to trust that you think you're getting a home run in Tua, that the team can still be better without Matthew Stafford to do it. Because again, why would you draft a quarterback for the future if you think if there's a chance you may not be there next year? I mean, it's going to help the next head coach. Oh, I got a quarterback right here. But obviously, you got to think about yourself. You got to think about, what do I need this year? If this was the first year of his tenure in Detroit, you can make a move like this because you have years coming up. He has to win this year. Detroit, if they don't win, he's gone. So I think they're going to keep their assets, go with Matthew Stafford, and build their team. That's what I think they should do, and that's what I think is the best move for them to make. So that's just my personal opinion. Plus, since you're already in the top 5, I just feel like there's no point to do anything drastic. Just sit there, pick the best player on the board, help improve your team, and try to go out there off free agency and off other guys that you draft during the NFL draft and try to have a winning product in Detroit next year. That's what I would do. And there's also a story coming out of Joe Burrow. 1975, number 1 overall draft pick Steve said that he talked to Joe Burrow and told him to pull an Eli on the Bengals. The Bengals, a lot of stuff's came out about the Bengals ever since they got the number 1 overall draft pick, because of Mike Brown, their GM/owner, who basically thinks he's the GM of the team. He has hired one of the lowest and the smallest staff of scouters in the league. They struggled for many years to give players top facilities to train in. And basically, the Bengals have kind of somewhat been behind a lot of things in the league because he has not been willing to budge and give all the latest things needed for an NFL team that a lot of teams have nowadays. So a lot of people are thinking that Joe Burrow's career could die if he goes to Cincinnati. So some people are starting to warn him, hey, do you really want to go to this situation? Do you really want to go to a situation where you could potentially be set up to fail. One player who was set up to fail, even though some people may have a different opinion, it was Josh Rosen. He went to Arizona, played for a year on a bad team, then got traded to Miami, didn't even get a chance outside of a couple of games to play. And now, obviously, players, teams, and players think, oh, he's not that good. Because he just was drafted in the wrong position. Sometimes being drafted to the wrong team can mess your career up. And a lot of people are concerned that the Bengals are not the best place. It was different with Andy Dalton because he was a second-round pick, so it was just like, if you ended up getting a gem in Andy Dalton, great, but if you ended up getting maybe just an average guy or he wasn't that good, it wasn't like, oh, we spent a first-round pick and he was destined to be a quarterback of our future. It's just he happened to be a good quarterback that we were able to keep behind for a very long time in Cincinnati. So if you think about that and you're Cincinnati, Burrow could potentially be listening to all these people telling him this, and basically willing to potentially not go to your team because of the fear that they could be putting themselves into a bad situation. And that's something that you really don't want around your team, that if you come to this team, your career is not going to flourish because of the organizational structure of the Cincinnati Bengals. But it's one of those things that I guess you can say happens. It's tough. But we'll have to see what happens. We'll see if Joe Burrow does start to maybe reports start coming out that he's starting to maybe try not to get to the Bengals and trying to plant some stuff to not go to the Bengals and et cetera, et cetera. We'll have to see when we get closer to draft time what we start to hear coming out of Burrow's camp and seeing the decisions that are actually end up being made. But coming up next, we're going to have some news and notes around the league again. Drew Brice has come back for another season. Joe Flacco could return for another season. And starting linebacker Nigel Bradham was cut by the Philadelphia Eagles. As you know, cap casualties happen around this time in the NFL. All that and more right here on the podcast.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segments, we talked about the 3 quarterbacks that potentially could go within the top 5 of the NFL draft. We depicted how that could potentially happen and why it could happen. We also talked about if Joe Burrow should pull an Eli on the Bengals and maybe try to force a trade if drafted or try to get them not to draft him. That's something that has been kind of planted in his head by a couple of people, and it's been more and more picking up more steam around NFL news outlets. So we'll have to see what happens when we get closer to the draft to see, will he potentially do such a thing? That's going to be the question. But now we're going to get into some news and notes around the league again, talking and starting with New Orleans Saints quarterback Drew Brees coming back for another season. As he has posted on Instagram, he is ready to return, and for what everybody feels like it's going to be Drew Brees' last year in the NFL. Obviously, this means the Saints are again going to go all in this year to try to win a championship after their last 3 disappointing playoff losses, still trying to break through in Drew Brees' last year. This is something that obviously I think a lot of people expected. I don't think this was surprising. So the Saints look like they're going to be back at full strength next year, and we'll have to see what additions they make to the team with Sean Payton and the staff. Now, obviously, this brings up a very big question within New Orleans because Teddy is a free agent. Now, obviously, if Drew Brees retired, there is this perception that the Saints may, even though it's not really reported, might have maybe considered keeping Teddy. And obviously, we know what's really been reported. There's a lot of hype behind Taysom Hill, as people say Sean Payton really likes him as his future franchise quarterback. And there was a report that Sean actually wanted Drew to come back for another year just to give himself a bridge year for Taysom to be his quarterback. Now, the thing about the situation that's very interesting going into this offseason is Taysom Hill is a restricted free agent this offseason. So teams could offer him. The only thing is, the perception is that there's a chance Taysom will probably stay because since he's never really been a quarterback in terms of in the NFL yet, is there any team really willing to offer him potentially bigger money to be what? Their quarterback? Just another core special teams gadget player? These are a lot of questions that have to be answered. That's why the expectation right now is that Taysom Hill will probably stay and Teddy will probably leave. Because it's highly unlikely that Sean Payton's going to let both of them walk. But also the Saints obviously can put a tender on him. And obviously in the NFL, if you know how restricted free agency rules work, a team can put a certain draft tender on you. So let's say they put a third round tender on you and you sign them and then they don't match. You have to give up a third round pick to get this player. So I highly, highly doubt anybody, if the Saints put a very high tender on him, I highly doubt anybody's going to give up a round 3 or up pick to get Taysom Hill. So he is more likely going to probably stay and hang around. So that's what I'm thinking. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But obviously, like I said, with Drew Brees back, it does set up for the potential for a potential playoff run for the Saints. And like I said, this last year, obviously, it could be one of those stories of that last hurrah for Drew Brees. Can he win the championship in his last year in the NFL? So that's going to be kind of the question here that we have to answer. That we have to, see about. But I'm sure, we'll have to see what, like I said, what moves are made this offseason by the Saints. And we'll have to see how much they value Taysom and Teddy Bridgewater. Which, again, Teddy Bridgewater is projected to walk because somebody's probably going to offer him upwards, as I've heard, $30 million. That's starting franchise QB money. And somebody really might pay Teddy Bridgewater to be their starting quarterback for the future. Another quarterback who'd be back next year is Joe Flacco. Obviously, Joe Flacco was replaced this year after being hurt with a neck injury by Drew Lock. Drew Lock looks like he will be the starting quarterback of the Denver Broncos for years to come if he plays like he did at the end of last year. So we don't know. Does that mean Joe Flacco would just be the backup quarterback? He is still under contract with the Denver Broncos, so he could just be a backup. We'll have to see, potentially, because, he's going to get cleared from his neck injury. So, that's why there's talks of, him returning. Obviously, I don't think he'll start, but, Joe Flacco at this point in his career, one of the issues that Joe Flacco's ever had, he was just never a good regular season quarterback, and also his deficiency, he's unmobile. So if he's on your team and you don't have a good offensive line, he's a sitting duck back there, which will very much limit your offensive production. So that's the only thing about maybe getting a guy like Joe Flacco, potentially, is you don't know. Is he going to help our team like we want him to? That's going to be the big question here. And these are things that people obviously are going to be looking for answers to. And we're going to have to see what happens. Also, other quarterback news. Cam Newton could potentially be moved by the Panthers amid rebuild. Now, obviously, we know they're going to look at Cam and see what he looks like and if he's healthy, but also they're saying that they expect him to potentially be moved among this rebuild process. There's also reports saying that they don't know. I mean, this Cam Newton situation could be big because he could be another quarterback who hits the market. And there are going to be teams vying for Cam Newton. This is probably one of the years in the last few that you have maybe 3 or 4 quarterbacks who could hit the market, legitimately hit the market, who have been starters in this league. Some coming off injury, some just maybe not willing to get paid by their current team, some getting an opportunity because maybe there's a quarterback ahead of them, and getting the ability to, start. Cam is someone I think a lot of people would want on their team. Cam hasn't played in a year, and if he gets healthy, we got to see how Cam looks. Potentially, you bring him in to a position battle. Obviously, when the rumors started that Cam Newton could potentially leave Carolina, people were talking about Chicago potentially. He could potentially become a Chicago Bear. He could potentially be, any of those things. And it's definitely something that I think a lot of people wonder about, because people wonder, would the Panthers really move off of Cam Newton? Would they really make that move? Would they really make that decision? Is Matt Rule going to go into his era with a new quarterback? These are decisions that have to be made. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And it's going to be interesting to see the decisions that are actually ended up being made. And my personal decision, and opinion, if you don't think you can get a quarterback who's going to be better or Cam Newton, or who could be your future, your franchise, there is absolutely no reason for you to get rid of Cam Newton, in my opinion. But that's just me. And lastly, Nigel Bradham, starting linebacker from the Philadelphia Eagles last few years, has been cut by the Philadelphia Eagles. So that's another valuable free linebacker a team can pick up this offseason. Obviously, around this time, this is where cap casualties happen, where some players cut some of their starting players who may have had injury issues or getting a little older, and so they're looking for a cheaper, younger alternative. He's just another one of those casualties that happen in the NFL. I'm sure a team who wants a solid veteran linebacker is going to pick him up. He will not be out there too long, I don't think. And I think he could be very effective for any team that wants a good linebacker or a potential starting linebacker for their potential starting linebacker unit. But coming up next, more news and notes. Could Odell be moved to the Jets potentially? Is Derek Carr on the trade market? And what's the market for Le'Veon Bell, as we know about his tumultuous relationship with Adam Gase in New York? All that and more right here on the GSMC Football Podcast.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about some more news and notes around the league. We talked about Drew Brice coming back for another NFL season, as he's probably going to be his last season. His very, very last season in the Saints uniform. Joe Flacco also could potentially return for another year after being cleared of his neck injury. So it'll be interesting to see if the Denver Broncos keep him as a backup to Drew Lock, or do they let him walk. And also Cam Newton potentially not being a part of the rebuilding plans of the Panthers, but we'll have to see. We still don't really have a definitive idea of what the Panthers want to do with Cam Newton yet. And also Nigel Bradham, starting linebacker for the last few years of the Philadelphia Eagles, has been cut. Obviously, it's just a part of the cap casualties. They're probably looking for a younger and cheaper alternative. Now, we're going to get into some more news notes about guys who may potentially be moved. There has been a report that potentially if the Browns did trade Odell Beckham, the Jets would be a team that you should watch out for. Obviously, if you're the Jets, with Sam Darnold, your young franchise quarterback, you really don't have a number one guy that you can rely on. Obviously, with them probably losing Robbie Anderson in free agency, you're losing your fastest wide receiver on the team, which Robbie Anderson was, which is your deep threat. If you trade it for Odell Beckham, not only do you get his speed, people consider him one of the better receivers in the league. So now you're getting a top-end receiver for your young quarterback that he can rely on. So this is going to be a very interesting situation. And a very interesting situation, in my opinion. Because, Odell obviously has had a lot of issues in the cities he's been. Obviously, this will put him back in New York, the city that, he loved. It was just very hard for him with the New York Giants, and it would be very, very interesting for him to go back there just to play for the other New York team. I think this move could potentially work for both sides. I think the only thing about it is what we've heard from Adam Gase's past few years with guys who have personalities have not been good. Jarvis Landry, Odell's current teammate and best friend from LSU, didn't, particularly from what we heard, did not like Adam Gase. He thought Adam Gase thought he was better than everybody and thought everybody should listen to him almost as a dictator. And so he was not very fond of Adam Gase. So if anybody can tell you about him, it's Jarvis Landry. So would Odell want to play for Adam Gase is another question. How would Adam Gase and Odell work? I feel like that could just potentially set up for another drama-filled potential year if he went to the Jets. But if it was going to be more calm and more relaxed, then I would think with the talent, in terms of talent on the field, it would be a smart decision. We just don't know how that chemistry would work. That would be the big question here. How would that all work out? Because if it doesn't work out, this could also hurt Odell Beckham, just how people view him. And I think that's something that obviously they don't want to happen. So, in other trade news too, there has been rumors that teams are starting to gear up to get Derek Carr, quarterback, Oakland Raiders. Well, now officially the Vegas Raiders. And this could be interesting. Obviously, since John Gruden has been there has been reports that he has never been a Derek Carr fan. He has never been the quarterback potentially that he wanted. Now, Carr, if you look at the numbers, have put up good stats. He's completing over 70% of his passes. He's very efficient. Doesn't turn the ball over. You would think, well, what's the issue? Some people think it's Oakland. The team is the issue. Obviously, if Oakland was one of the worst defensive teams in the secondary last year, so you could easily score on the Oakland Raiders. But there were also, Derek Carr had some of his worst games at the end of the year, which I think started raising that argument that maybe they should trade him and get rid of him. So I think that's what's kind of raising these questions. And I think it just adds a layer to this saga because there has been a report that the Oakland Raiders are willing to offer $30 million a year to Tom Brady. And I would feel like if you're Oakland, obviously you wouldn't trade Derek Carr unless you knew you were getting Tom Brady. You wouldn't just give up. I mean, unless John Gruden just feels like he cannot have another year as Derek Carr as his quarterback, then I don't see why you would even let him go. Now, I could understand if you get Tom Brady, you may feel like that's an upgrade. So, okay, we'll trade Derek Carr. And listen, you can get a pretty decent pick for Derek Carr. Because Derek Carr is a starting quarterback, in my opinion, in this league. And he has all the potential in the world to lead a team. So, we'll have to see. We'll have to see what happens. I think that potentially in this situation, there are teams obviously that need a quarterback this offseason. This would add just another name to the quarterback roulette that we could have this offseason. We could have 5, 6, 7 new teams with new starting quarterbacks next year. So, and I'm not even talking about the draft. I'm talking just from free agency and trades. So if say all the rookies drafted start week 1, that's the potential of 10 starting quarterbacks, in my opinion, that we could potentially have next year that are new. That's a quarter of the league, or almost a quarter of the league, that have a new starting quarterbacks. So this offseason will definitely be one of the more interesting offseasons with all the potential moves that could potentially be made. And it's just going to be interesting to see what happens when it comes to these situations. Obviously, I'm sure if Derek Carr does become available, the Oakland will have a market for him. I would consider him probably one of the more safer options out there at quarterback. We can never forget Derek Carr did have almost an MVP year a couple of years ago before he got hurt. So let's not sit here and act like he can't play, because he can play. It's just some things happen a certain way. Some things don't go your way. So we're going to have to see. So, and lastly, what is the market for Le'Veon Bell? Obviously, Le'Veon has... Well, there was a report coming out that the Jets felt like Le'Veon gained weight, which made him lose his explosiveness. If you watched Le'Veon Bell last year, you could feel like he was a little slower. He wasn't the same Le'Veon. We didn't know if that was because he had a year off or what. But the Jets felt like he was not in the best shape, which hurt him. And not to only mention that a lot of people, especially Adam Gase, has been widely known to not potentially be the biggest supporter of Le'Veon Bell, saying last year he doesn't believe that the money he was paid should be paid to running backs. So there has been this question that they've been looking to potentially trade him. And then there's going to be questions again this offseason that Le'Veon Bell could be traded again. And if the Jets really feel like that's the case with that report, Le'Veon Bell could be on the move again. And I'm sure that all the teams at the trade deadline who were maybe trying to trade for him then will be back trying to get him again this time. Plus maybe some extra teams. Potentially the Falcons with the pending cut of Devontae Freeman. Obviously Pittsburgh trying to fix their running back situation. Maybe Detroit. A lot of teams potentially could pick up Le'Veon Bell. So he has a bit of a market. But coming up next, we're going to get into some XFL predictions. I'll give you my predictions and thoughts on each game, who I think is going to win the game, and why, right here on the podcast. Stay tuned.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast. Last segment, we talked about potential guys who could potentially be on the move. Odell Beckham potentially could be on the move. They connected him to the Jets. So is that maybe something Cleveland explores this offseason, bringing Odell Beckham back to New York? How would that relationship with Adam Gase go? So obviously his current teammate on Cleveland, Jarvis Landry, knows about that, and so on and so forth. We also talked about the potential for Derek Carr being moved, as Oakland looks like potentially, if they're able to get Brady, or even if they might not get Tom Brady, shop Derek Carr to potentially be traded. And then we talked about the market for Le'Veon Bell, as obviously he's been someone that, Adam Gase has not been a big fan of since he's been in New York. And so he could be on the trade market like he was for the trade deadline last year, this offseason. So all that I talked about in the last segment, but now we're going to get into the XFL. And I'm going to give you my previews and predictions for both all 4 games coming up this weekend. First game we're going to talk about is the Houston Roughnecks and the Tampa Bay Vipers. Obviously, Tampa Bay right now, 0-2 right now. They, so far, from a lot of perspective, has looked like the worst XFL team so far after 2 weeks, going against a Houston team with P.J. Walker looking like a potential XFL MVP this season. Obviously, 2 games in, you're going to pretty much project that the Houston Roughnecks will probably win this game. Obviously, this is going to be Houston's on the road now, going to Tampa, so this is going to be also Tampa's first road game. First home game they have this season, so maybe home cooking can help. We'll have to see if Aaron Murray could potentially be back. One thing I've seen from this situation in Tampa Bay is that their quarterback situation just really is not that good. All 3 quarterbacks have played, and all of them have not played the best. So right now, it looks like the quarterback right now is really limiting the Tampa Bay Vipers, because offensively and defensively, they haven't played bad. Defensively, they've been in these games. It's just offensively, they weren't able to do anything in the first game. In the second game, they only scored 9 points. So again, they really weren't able to do too much offensively. So right now, offensively, they're struggling. So this has kind of always been the thing that's kind of been the issue, and we're going to have to see what happens when it comes to the Vipers coming up this week. Can they potentially bounce back? Can they get more of a rhythm through the passing game? Who the quarterback is going to be? Is it going to be Murray? Is it going to be Cornelius? Is it going to be Flowers? These are all questions that need to be answered by the Vipers this weekend, and we'll have to see what they actually end up deciding to do when it gets down to it. The next game we're going to talk about is the Dallas Renegades versus the the Seattle Dragons. Obviously, the Dragons last week won against the Vipers. Obviously, a big game, a very, very big game, because they play at Seattle Stadium, and they got 30,000 out there, and it was loud, and it was just, it was a great game with the atmosphere that was out there. So obviously, they're looking to build off the momentum. They're probably one of the more impressive 1-1 teams in the league, going against another 1-1 team in the Dallas Renegades, who won their first game last week against LA, 25-18. Obviously, the return of Mr. Landry Jones. Obviously, the Dallas Renegades are also coached by Bob Stoops. So they're going to be going against the Dragons of Seattle. Obviously, both teams trying to get a good, just trying to continue their momentum. This is going to be on Fox at 5 o'clock. Obviously, so this is probably going to be another great atmosphere. If we can get the same crowd, if not a bigger crowd that we had last time, out in Seattle, I expect this to be a very big game. Kind of gives you big game feels. We talked about this on the Monday podcast, how I feel like Fox games feel more bigger, especially when it gets to the later games. It just feels like the game's a big game. It just feels like the game this is big time. It just feels that way. And that's why I think the atmosphere in the arena they're in sets up for such a great area. So it's a very interesting situation to me. But I think I'm going to go with Seattle to get their second win this week against the Dallas Renegades. Dallas was obviously projected, actually, in the Vegas picks to win it all this year, obviously. But they're both all 1-1, but I think they're going to go and lose to the Seattle Dragons this week. I think it's going to be a good game, probably the best game of the first day of the XFL this coming weekend. Next game, New York Guardians versus St. Louis. Obviously, this is a very big game, not particularly in terms of because of who the matchup is, but the storyline. If you remember watching the New York Guardians game last week, if you remember, Matt McGloin, starting quarterback, openly chewed out his head coach, chewed out the offensive game plan, and was very vocal about how much he hated the game plan, how much he hated the offense, and how he had absolutely no confidence in the entire game plan and what they were running. So obviously this was a big issue. Obviously with the XFL, it's so much more transparent and mic'd up that you can hear these conversations. You can hear what people are saying. So obviously this is very big because obviously, you know, as a team, you would rather keep this very close to the vest as much as possible. But obviously, you know, Mr. McGloin had to get stuff off his chest. And so we're going to have to see what happens this week. Obviously going against St. Louis. St. Louis coming off their first loss this season in a game against the Houston Roughnecks last week, 28-24. ESPN game, 3 o'clock on Sunday. So I'm going to go with, right now, St. Louis. I think they're going to come out with a victory in this game. They're also at home, so I think they're going to be able to come out with a victory. I just feel like the Guardians, you don't know which Guardians team you're getting. You don't. Are you getting the first week Guardians who look like a very fun, loving team who had everything go their way, or are you going to get the second week Guardians who just look like everything just crumbled and they didn't score a single point in their game? You really don't know which one you're getting, but obviously you hope you get the one that's going to be most effective and win you a ball game. So that's my pick, St. Louis. I think they're going to be able to come out with the victory in this game and do what they got to do. And then last game on FS1, 6 o'clock on Sunday, the DC Defenders versus LA. So, obviously, Cardale Jones has also been the other impressive quarterback this year for the DC. This is their first road game. They're playing against LA. LA is a good team. They're 1-1 this year, so there's not no scrub. They can play. They can ball. Obviously, people are going to wonder what Cardale Jones does in this game, as he has looked very, very impressive. And it's going to be interesting. You know, and I think it's just going to be interesting what happens. I think DC is going to win this game, though. I think they're going to go undefeated and stay undefeated. I think it's funny because I feel like the biggest game potentially right now in the XFL is going to be, depending on how the season turns out, Houston Roughnecks versus DC Defenders, which I heard they don't play till week 7. And I think, you know, it's just going to be interesting to see what happens when it gets to that point. And so I think DC's going to be able to pick up a victory. Los Angeles is a good team. Obviously, Josh Johnson's leading that team, and I think he played well in his game back last week, but you know, I think he'll play well again this week. I just think at the end of the day, it's just one of those things where I just think DC looks like one of the most complete teams in the league, especially from the defensive perspective. Getting turnovers, picks is 2 weeks in a row, just playing well on all facets of the game, and that's what you want to do. And obviously, offensively, with Pep Hamilton, I think is one of the better coaches. I think coaching them looks perfect for the team. I think that they're going to be able to come out there and just pick up a very solid victory and remain undefeated on the season. But thank you for listening to the GSMC Football Podcast. I appreciate you tuning in, downloading, you know, this playing live, wherever you are in the world. Please don't forget to subscribe to us if on the network you're listening or whatever platform you're listening to us is subscribing. And leave a review also. We'd love to hear how can I be better as a podcast host. Also, don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, as we have social media for all of our podcasts. So thank you, and have a good day.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.